Now, I've alluded to this before in a community post, but could this potentially be a meta? Now, when I say meta, I don't mean the Ouroboros meta. There are ways, and you are very easily able to outperform this in terms of DPS. What I mean by meta is I mean specifically for, can Bloodsucker and Intimidate make a comeback? And from the testing and playing around with it I've done so far, the answer mostly seems to be yes. However, the no would be open world. So essentially, what I'm telling you is, if you're running solo, heroic, maybe not even solo, I'm yet to test this in a group, which should potentially be next on my list, but for solo, heroic, if you have Ouroboros, Bloodsucker, Intimidate is possibly the meta for missions specifically, just because they're linear, enemy density, etc, etc. Now, like I just said, there are ways to beat it, such as using sort of like the gold standard Strikers build, 4-piece Strikers utilising the backpack, Grouper with Obliterate, Coyote's Mask. You've also got this build with Unstoppable Force and Obliterate, or you could go Vigilance, higher upfront damage, lower total DPS. But what I'm going to be talking about is this. 4-piece Strikers, you can go 2-piece Sokolov or Sokolov Grupo, Bloodsucker and Intimidate. In terms of stats, they're all basically the same. Like, the only difference between them is the first build, obviously you get Coyotes, as well as the 100% amplifier from Strikers. The second build with Unstoppable Force and Obliterate, you get a 50% multiplier. Intimidate gives 40.71, which is nothing to scoff at. Obviously, out of these three, it is going to be the lower DPS. However, it's Ouroboros. It still does plenty of DPS. The one thing that we're basically doing is we're going to sacrifice just a tiny bit of DPS to potentially double our armor, which is nothing really to scoff at. And due to the fact that it's an SMG, playing close range is going to be the most beneficial. So the end result should effectively be probably the better build to run for essentially missions. DPS, because of Ouroboros, isn't really going to be an issue. You're kind of just comparing nuclear warheads at this point. Once you sort of breach like 13 million DPS, you have more than enough DPS to kill pretty much most things in the game very, very quickly. And even with Intimidate, we're still rocking at least 15 mil DPS. So we're like 2 mil over. There's not really too much else to really go on about other than actually comparing the DPS numbers and to see if this would potentially be worthwhile for you. Now, the huge benefit to utilizing Intimidate and Bloodsucker is previously in a lot of builds that utilize Bloodsucker, the DPS is, although it's still high, it's just low enough so that you're unable to kill things as quick, so that when you do get a kill, by the time you get to your second kill, you've already lost that bonus armor, so you're not making use of Intimidate, unless of course you're running blues, which is just going to decrease your DPS anyway. The true benefit and why this potentially could be a meta is just the simple fact that Ouroboros kills so fast that you can run this on a 6 red build to get all of your DPS and still get essentially the complete benefits of Bloodsucker. Effectively, Ouroboros is no blues required, which is hilariously good fun. Now, as stated, Intimidate is the weaker of the three, so we've got Intimidate on top, then Obliterate with Unstoppable Force, and then with a Striker's Backpack and Coyotes. Obliterate and Unstoppable Force does do 6.6% more, and then the Backpack with Coyotes does like a good 15% more. However, although this seems like a very large drop, one thing I'd like you to understand is this is the best in slot Strikers build with St. Elmo's. Chest, Obliterate, Coyote's Mask, 4-piece Strikers. We've all seen it like 1,000 times. This is the math for that build versus Intimidate on Oreos. Oreo is still doing like 34% more. Granted, this is assuming we have the stacks in range with Intimidate. But it's still doing 34% more. Even without Intimidate, Ouroboros does literally just about 4% less. So even without Intimidate, Ouroboros is keeping up with the 65% multiplier from Strikers, where Elmo has the 100% multiplier. This is the difference between those two weapons. It's kind of insane. And again, although we are dropping a good chunk in overall DPS, we are getting that increase in survivability, which I know a lot of players are going to like. And just due to how quick Ouroboros can kill, something like Ouroboros with Bloodsucker is going to be very, very powerful. Might not necessarily be up your street or down your alley, whatever metaphor you would like to use. However, it's undeniable that this potentially could become essentially the new Bloodsucker Intimidate meta. Essentially meaning that Ouroboros has potentially brought the faithful duo back from the brink. Now, for PvP, I imagine this could work very, very well with Adrenaline Rush. I would assume Matador would be best in slot here simply because you're going to need to get as much bonus armor as possible. I've not done a lot of testing with Intimidate, simply just because of where in PvE we're going to focus mostly on the all red side of things. It does seem that if you're going to go Intimidate, you kind of really will want at least a few blues to get Adrenaline Rush to work correctly, so that way you can get as much armor as possible. Although that being said, you can still put like at least on this specific build, you can put at least 4 blue cores on, and it draws essentially even with what St. Elmo could do with the Striker's backpack. So yeah, Ouroboros is dumb. Bloodsucker works exceedingly well with it. Intimidate is a good choice talent to have here simply because of the amount of multiplier you get from it, which gives us the total of a 40.71% increase. Adding that into Strikers, which is another 65%, you end up with what is potentially probably a very, very powerful and safe build to run for your solo heroic missions. And it is something that I would genuinely recommend. I've not really struggled with this at all. Anyway, that is just about going to do it for this video. Hopefully this has been informative. If not, I am sorry. However, in the meantime, have fun, good luck, and don't die. It's bad for the health.